The left arm of the Pirate King is officially angry, and it has ended up costing the left arm of Saint Summers, which is canonically the only arm that One Piece characters are allowed to lose. Shanks lost his left arm, Eustace Kid lost his left arm, as did Basil Hawkins, as did Kiku, and even one of Nami's original designs featured her having lost most of her left arm. Being a left arm in One Piece dooms you to an even worse fate than being a mother, but we hop into the pretty big conundrum set up by Saint Summers pretty immediately in this chapter, and I think that Oda has done a really fantastic job of setting up this choice and hammering in exactly what it is that Summers is asking for. What we're doing is basically weighing up the sum of human and giant knowledge and history and culture against the life of a child. We are being asked to choose between the past and the future. We either need to lose who we were or lose what we will become. And in that respect, there's not really much of a choice to be made. Yes, you can choose to sacrifice the child to preserve your history and your culture, but in that case, who are you preserving it for? And so Jarl's decision actually makes a painful amount of sense, but then there is Rana, the little star of this chapter, who has a very different solution to this problem. But before that, we have this nice little section of the Straw Hats having been tied up, which is traditionally a position of tip-top banter. Although in this case, Nami says something kind of interesting about how not even the worst people in this world use children as hostages, to which I have to respectfully disagree. As even all the way back in chapter 1 of One Piece, Higame used child Luffy as a hostage, and it's actually been a fairly common tactic for fictional ne'er-do-wells ever since. I'd also just like to take a moment to point out Brook in this group shot. Everyone else is tied up, but he is, well, he's especially tied up, real tight. Gunko seems to have had a much larger focus on making sure that Brook stays restrained, and it's pretty great because it makes him look like a mummy, which is hitting some nice Brook potential that I feel like we don't explore anywhere near enough. Back on Wano, in order to blend in, Brook had to dress up like a traditional Japanese ghost, which I loved, and I am always keen to see more classic horror from Brook. And in one panel, it also looks like Gunko has very conveniently sealed Brook's mouth shut, no doubt because she can't handle any more words of rejection or insolence from him. But it is again very convenient because at the moment, Brook can't monologue about exactly who he thinks Gunko may be, or at the very least who he thinks she definitely is not, according to him, or any of the other things that he may happen to know about the Holy Knights. But while we wait for that, a big highlight of this chapter for me was obviously Robin versus Saint Summers. Oh mate, it was brief but fantastic, that's what she said, etc. But mate, that very first hit on Saint Summers was drawn in such an incredibly powerful way. And I think that this hits me particularly hard because it is drawn very similarly to when Vice Admiral Doberman was attacked by Saint Saturn at the end of Egghead Island. It's that feeling of a force so overwhelming, and I love the choreography of the head being flung back with the rest of the body forced to follow. It's a fantastic smack in the crack, one which Summers really should take more care to avoid, but I guess that caring about what your opponent does wasn't really part of Holy Knight training, and I guess we could always ask Shanks, who may have spent up to 2 years undergoing this training on Marijois, and while we're there, we may as well ask him some questions about his brother and his father and his baby that he's left in East Blue. Questions, so many questions that I need answered, and instead of waiting, I'm going to ask Shanks pretty directly using Polybuzz, a free, private, and immersive AI chat platform with over 20 million characters, including Mr. Shanks. But look, I have a better idea, because guess what, mates? I have just found Nami, and I have a devious plan. Kiss, marry, kill. Wapol, Helmeppo, and Saint Charlos. For any of you watching, please do feel free to leave your preferences in the comments. But here is our canon Nami response. Kiss Wapol to avoid eating his horrible cooking. Marry Helmeppo because he's easy to manipulate for favors. And avoid killing Charlos by running away to the East Blue. You know what? That actually feels very true to Nami, because she has actively refused to kill Charlos, knowing that an admiral will be sent after her, and Wapol's cooking is indeed terrible because he doesn't do any of it. He just eats everything raw, be it park benches, pirate ships, or even subordinates. But you know what? Let's ask Sanji the same question. Kiss, marry, kill. Ivankov, Caroline, or Bon Clay? Sanji choked on his cigarette. And I guess that's his unfortunate departure from this world. But look, the beauty of fictional characters is that you can always bring them back. And if you'd like to try it out for yourself, then all you need to do is click my link in the description to download Polybuzz today and gain access to 20 million characters from every piece of media imaginable, also real life, and you can even create your own characters to chat with. Plus, you can use my promo code GRAND22 for a free Poly Premium trial. Just enter the code in the search bar and bam, it is right there waiting for you. And just on a personal note, sponsors like Polybuzz are what make our videos possible. So please do click the link and show them your support. But for now, it's back to you, me. And to think that Robin, our Robin, is getting in a hit this powerful on a Holy Knight without Haki, that is pretty telling of the raw strength that she is capable of. Although I think what's happening here is a bit deceptive. It's not like Robin could just thwack a dude and this would be the result. Robin is using Cien Fleur, which is a root technique that she uses for a lot of different abilities. It literally means 100 arms, and I don't know if she uses exactly 100 arms every time, but at the very least it means lots and lots of arms, and Robin has used Cien Fleur to do stuff like make wings, make nets, and even make the big old tree that she used to protect Rebecca against Diamante. Interestingly though, she almost never uses Cien Fleur as a direct attack, or at the very least I can't find much evidence of it outside of this one sort of cleanup attack she used on Marines during Enies Lobby. So thematically, that is a pretty big deal. Robin using this attack means that she has absolutely run out of patience, and she is prepared to rip Saint Summers to pieces. And what I love is seeing the panel of Robin constructing this giant arm to attack Summers with, which is important to dwell on because in the actual attack page, I don't think it necessarily does a great job of displaying the sheer scale of the arm that Summers is being attacked by. But essentially, Robin is smacking him down with the concentrated power of 100 arms, and assumedly she's also baking in the principles of Fisherman Karate into this attack, because she learned some of that during her 2 years with the Revolutionary Army, and what we are seeing is a nice open palm strike. And I don't believe we've seen this attack before. It's named after the Crispedia flower, which are actually native to Australia, so g'day mates. And because they're Australian, I am obliged to inform you that we also call them billy buttons, because that's just what we do. And according to the internet, they symbolize wholeness, unity, and completeness, which makes a lot of sense because this Cien Fleur attack is rather uncharacteristically joining all of the 100 hands together to create a single unified hand. I should also point out that Cien Fleur was used to roll Yama off the cliff during Skypiea, so I guess that is another direct attack, sort of. But I don't know, to me it's more like bowling with a really fat man as the ball. But even if this was an attack, Robin in this case was also using it to attack someone that she felt no sympathy towards, as well as someone who was an intrinsic threat to the voices of the past. Yama was just rolling around up a yard, smashing up ruins, whatever. And now we've got Saint Summers demanding that the voices of the past be silenced on Elbaf. And I have to say, as much as it's not the best situation for Robin, I do love it when she has no chill whatsoever. Robin is not messing around in this chapter, and we continue to see that when she goes straight for the kill with Summers by snapping his neck in very much the same way she did against Gecko Moria on Thriller Bark. There are times in One Piece where Robin just up and decides to murder a dude. She can be so vicious and really lives up to that assassination skill she touted when she first joined the crew. But because One Piece is a story, Robin is only really allowed to use these sorts of attacks against characters who have the power to survive them. In Moria's case, he switched himself out with his Doppelman Shadow, and as for Summers, well, this man can simply regenerate all damage, which we don't see in the typical way that we've been shown with Gunko, Ethan Baron, Venus Juro, and Saint Saturn. And obviously that's because all of the regeneration is happening internally, but we do know that it's happening because we're given the same sound effect, which is the Paki Paki onomatopoeia. So there's no doubt in this chapter that Summers is using the same kind of regeneration displayed by Gunko earlier, and I guess this is our soft confirmation that all of the Holy Knights possess these abilities and have likely made some sort of pact with Imu for them. Or at the very least, they all possess the regeneration aspect, but what they may or may not, probably may not have, is the perpetual youth part. Because Figelin Garling was a Holy Knight back during God Valley, and he has since aged quite a bit, so it may only be those with the title of a Five Elder who are granted the actual immortality in addition to regeneration. Here's what I love about regeneration. Having this ability gives Oda license to go all out with brutality, which is very good for characters like Robin, who have these attacks that often need to be nerfed because of how visceral and kind of disturbing they truly are. But it also opens up a lot of nice opportunities for character writing. It's always interesting to see how certain characters respond to regeneration, by which I mean characters who possess it, how they respond to their possession of it. And in the case of Saint Summers, you can clearly see that this power has made him extremely arrogant, and it will likely contribute to his downfall. Summers doesn't think that he can be harmed, or at least he didn't think that before the end of this chapter, which we will get to, but that puts him in a position where mistakes are easily made. Summers doesn't have to do a lot of, really hard mind thinking because it doesn't matter. From his perspective, his opponents aren't physically capable of stopping him no matter what. He could make infinite mistakes, but his opponents would still lose because they can't compensate for infinity plus one. So there's some really great writing opportunities to exploit that mindset of Saint Summers. But here's what I don't like about Regeneration. I am a little bit worried that Egghead Island and Elbaf are starting to set a new standard for One Piece antagonists, and that going forward this sort of regeneration is going to need to be something that major and even minor antagonists have in some form for them to be taken seriously, which I really don't want for One Piece, but this is a very classic shonen trap. A new antagonist with a new power gets introduced, and then all subsequent antagonists need to either have that same power or an ability even more powersome than the power, because otherwise it's like taking a step down. Where's the drama? We dealt with someone stronger than this in the last arc. Step up your game, mate. And I really don't want that for One Piece, because one of its advantages is the charm of the unique villains and what they bring to the table. Something that does comfort me is that there was a bit of a fear of this happening during the days of Skypiea, because we just came from fighting a crocodile on Alabasta, who was a very tricksome Logia user, and we went straight to dealing with God Enel, another Logia. And in the hands of a lesser author, One Piece may have continued with just increasingly dangerous and annoying Logia users. However, Eiichiro Oda had the good sense to bring things way back down to earth with a Zoan antagonist in Rob Lucci. But then again, we are now in the final saga, so I don't know if bringing things back down to earth is gonna be quite on the menu. If anything, we should be skyrocketing right up. And it does feel like every main antagonist from here on out is either a Logia, a mythical Zoan, or has abyss powers, or some combination of the three, pretty much all of which allow regeneration in some form or another. But to continue giving Robin all of the credit in the world for this chapter, I loved when she tackled Summers off the tree, very much doing the classic Kirby suck and jump off the stage, but without actually needing to jump off herself. That is such an amazing use of her devil fruit. But again, it's one that we really can't have unless we have an opponent who can actually deal with it, because the reality of what Robin's doing here is it's actually pretty grim. I have to give it to Robin though, especially after I got ever so many comments about how she wouldn't fight Summers. She can't fight Summers. Ow, a thorn, we can't have that. And then in this chapter, Robin gets her entire clone body pierced with thorns, which she feels in her real body, and she tanks that pain like an absolute champ. Robin really doesn't get anywhere near enough credit and appreciation for what she can do in fight form from the fanbase, but to be fair, she doesn't really get enough appreciation or credit from Eiichiro Oda either. Here's another thing I noticed about this section though. This whole chapter basically takes place over the span of 30 seconds. That's the countdown that Saint Summers gives in the beginning, and we reach the full 30 seconds by the end, which I do really like as a framing device. There's something very cool about Summers continuing the countdown even though he's dealing with Robin and all of these threats of assaulted death. It's very sleek, it's very professional, and it is on point to continue the mission of destroying Elbaf's culture. But here's the thing, right? I think this is going to end up being one of the most frustrating anime episodes to watch when it gets adapted in a year or two from now, because the anime adapts at most one chapter per episode. So that episode is going to start with Summers declaring that Jarl has 30 seconds to decide, and then 10 minutes into the episode, Summers is going to say something like, "All right, mate, you've only got 20 seconds left." So we'll be moving at a rate of about 1 second per minute. Things are going to feel unbelievably slow, which isn't 100% Toei's fault. Even with a better adaptation rate of 2 to 3 chapters per episode, this section would still feel slow due to the extremely small time frame that Oda chose. But I think it's now time to highlight Little Rana, because Robin and Scopper Gaban fought a hard campaign to own this chapter, but there is no doubt that it belongs to Rana, a character who we've only just met, but one who I would now willingly die for. And you know what? I'd even be willing to take a few of you watching with me. She is worth it. And I really didn't expect to be hit this hard by one of the kids on Elbaf. Or at the very least, if I did, I expected it to be Colin. Oda tends to have a pretty standard formula with kids in One Piece. He focuses on implementing child characters a lot more than many shonen authors choose to do, and it's because Oda sees them as effective vessels to get across ideas of both the past and the future being rolled together. Because these kids all come from a certain heritage. I'm talking all across One Piece, not just Elbaf. Wano, Whole Cake Island, Dressrosa, Fishman Island, Alabasta, kids are everywhere. And these kids are a product of the past. They were born and raised into a certain culture, infinitely larger and more significant than they are as individuals. But these kids are also the ones charged with taking that culture and forging a future. Momonosuke will always be the prime example of this. He had and still has the entire history and expectations of Wano on his his shoulders, and eventually he will need to make a decision about whether or not to open the borders and change Wano forever. And here with Rana, I think it's very appropriate that she gets to voice her opinion on this choice. Summers gave this decision to Jarl explicitly because of his seniority, that he was the one most experienced to make the decision. And no disrespect to Mr. Jarl, but his time is over. It's Rana and her generation who are going to be the caretakers of culture for the next few centuries. So I think it's very valuable to hear what they have to say. And so Rana makes a very heartfelt plea to allow her to die so that the schools and libraries are preserved. And very importantly, this is not because of how historically or culturally significant they are. Kids of that age are not capable of understanding that. But Rana wants to make this choice because going to school makes her happy, and she doesn't want to take that happiness away from others for her sake. It's a very Luffy-like way of looking at things. Luffy doesn't concern himself with history or politics or even relationships beyond those that he directly has. It's very simple emotional maths. School makes me happy, therefore it makes other people happy, therefore school should stay. And look, little Rana isn't insane. She knows full well the weight of this decision. She's even shaking the entire time in fear of death. And look, I dare say that the face Rana makes right before she thinks she's about to die is a very Will of D smile. I'm not saying that she's a member of the D clan, but she certainly has that same spirit and innate philosophy that most of them are born with. And you don't need to be a D to live and die like one. Kozuki Oden wasn't a D, and yet he died with a massive smile on his face. Or Don Quixote Rocinante, who was very pleased with the treasure that he was leaving behind, from the position of being born into world nobility, the exact opposite of the Ds. And very importantly, on the same page that Rana is prepared to die for the schools and the library, we have Jarl ordering Ange to burn them down, which is such great juxtaposition. They need to be on the same page. The decisions being made by the very youngest and the very oldest of the island. Both of them have the same goal, to keep everyone happy and safe, but they come to completely different conclusions on how to do that. And the really brilliant thing is that you cannot fault either of them for the decision they made, even though they're the exact opposite choices. And just for an extra shot of sadism, Ange does acquiesce to Jarl's command, and then there is a series of panels of Ange, Sol, and Robin, and especially Robin here. She kills me because Robin's got this expression of knowing that yes, this is the right thing to do, but the cost is that she has to give up her history, her culture, and Ohara's voices in order to save the children of Elbaf. I've spoken a lot about the narrative revival of Sol in past videos, but look, these books on Elbaf are a narrative revival of everyone in Ohara. Their will, their legacy, and their voices are all alive right now in the Owl Library. So what's happening here is Robin is being forced to leave her mother and Professor Clover to die a second time. But luckily, no such choice need be made with the arrival of Scopper Gaban and the swift dismemberment of St. Summers, who loses a hand to the axework of Gaban. And after all of this talk about regeneration, it should be quite striking to everyone that Summers does not regenerate from this attack. Now that does not mean that he won't. The next chapter could start with him regrowing his hand, but there are currently no sound effects. There's no pucky pucky happening whatsoever. And that's not good for St. Summers. He needs that pucky pucky. And it's interesting that it's not there because his regeneration kicked in immediately after he was injured by Robin. So we could be looking at a very permanent damage here, and we could be on the cusp of figuring out how to deal with this regeneration, which could be Haki related. Summers is visibly struck with what appears to be Conqueror's Haki, so perhaps the solution to regeneration is just to have the drive strong enough to exert your willpower over Imu's abilities and to say, hey, stop that now. Sort of like what happened with Zoro and Monet. In the end, she was just so terrified of Zoro that she couldn't hold herself together. But even if this was the solution, it would still make the Holy Knights quite a bit of a problem, because we're very much lacking in Conqueror's users at the moment, with Luffy and Zoro still chilling in the underworld. But the face, mate, the face that Scopper Gaban makes at the end of this chapter, it is terrifying. This is the first instance we've seen of a deadly serious Scopper Gaban, and I would be shocked if Summers was capable of standing up to him alone. Maybe, very maybe, with the combined abilities of Killingham and Gunko, or maybe with a secret power that we have yet to see from the Holy Knights. But if these three don't do something quick, then their campaign on Elbaf is going to be over before Luffy even wakes up from his food coma. So we'll see what they choose to do about that, if indeed they have the time to choose anything at all. But you let me know what you thought of this chapter in the comments below.